Let's wash the trash out with vintage." The words, sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the opulent air of the Celestial Gala in New York City. Nothing cleans the stain of the gutter quite like it. Before the sentence even finished, the cork shot from a bottle of crystal with a vicious pop. It wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. A torrent of pale gold champagne erupted, catching the light of a dozen chandeliers before crashing down, cold and sticky, all over the simple emerald green gown of a woman who had been standing in perfect, unassuming silence. A wave of laughter followed, brittle, cruel, and echoing off the vaulted ceilings and marble floors. At the center of the spectacle, holding the dripping bottle like a scepter, stood Isabella Sterling, wife of the billionaire titan Marcus Sterling. Her short, blood-red dress hugged a figure honed by personal trainers and malice. Her lips curled into a smirk of pure, unadulterated delight. Guests gasped. A few clapped, caught up in the vicious theater. Others, holding their own flutes, simply stared, stunned into immobility, as the woman in green stood there, soaked but utterly, impossibly, unbroken. Before we dive deeper into this story of revenge and ruin, I have to ask, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments below. It's incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you believe that dignity is non-negotiable and that arrogance deserves a reckoning, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these incredible moments of justice to light, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this one ends. Now, back to her. Evelyn Vance. She didn't so much as flinch, not when Isabella Sterling, the self-appointed queen of Manhattan society, held the bottle aloft like a trophy, not when the expensive champagne, smelling cloyingly of sugar and alcohol, trickled down her neck, pooling at the hem of her dress and soaking into her satin heels. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, framing a face that seemed carved from alabaster, a mask of serene composure. She made only one small movement, reaching up to adjust the thin strap of her gown. Nothing more. It was a gesture of such subtle defiance, as if being humiliated in front of 500 of the city's most powerful people was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a spilled drink at a cocktail party. Isabella, high on the attention, strutted to the stage and snatched the microphone from the stand. The band leader looked on, confused as the music faltered. "Champagne," she declared, her voice amplified, inescapable, "is for winners. It's for people who belong, not for imposters who sneak their way into rooms they could never afford." The crowd chuckled, a low, sycophantic rumble. A few people clapped, their applause feeding the beast. Marcus Sterling himself, seated at the head table, leaned back in his chair, a vision of tailored invincibility. He folded his arms across his chest, a lazy, approving smile playing on his lips. His silence was the loudest endorsement in the room. But not everyone was entertained. By the sprawling buffet of lobster towers and glistening caviar, a young waiter named Miguel froze, his hands trembling so badly he had to set his silver tray down. His fingers, almost of their own accord, slipped his phone from his pocket. He didn't even think. He just hit record. Near the stage, an elderly woman with a cascade of silver hair, matriarch of an old money family that valued discretion over spectacle, leaned toward her husband. "This is disgraceful," she whispered, her voice tight with disgust. Her words were lost in the rising tide of mockery, but Evelyn Vance remained rooted to her spot, anchored by a force the room couldn't comprehend. There were no diamonds flashing at her throat, no entourage of bodyguards parting the way for her. There was nothing for this room to respect but the profound weight of her silence. And that silence was becoming heavier than all the gold and marble in the building. Years ago, in smaller rooms with cheaper wine and even crueler whispers, she had learned to swallow ridicule. She had choked it down, let it burn in her stomach, and used it as fuel. But tonight was different. Tonight, she would not be swallowing anything. Isabella raised her hand again, snapping her fingers with the sharp crack of a whip. "Security," she commanded, her voice dripping with the pleasure of absolute power. "Get her out of here before her stench of desperation ruins my party." Two burly men in black suits detached themselves from the wall, their faces impassive. They began to move through the crowd, a human battering ram parting the sea of silk and tuxedos. They were heading straight for Evelyn, and still, she did not move. The microphone crackled again as Isabella, flawless and terrible in her red dress, savored her victory lap. "Look at her," she sneered, sweeping a perfectly manicured hand toward Evelyn. "Drenched and silent. Does that look like power to you?" A fresh wave of laughter swept through the hall, the ugly kind that feeds on the humiliation of another. Some guests had the decency to look away, their discomfort visible, but many more leaned in, their faces hungry for the final act of this public execution. Marcus Sterling remained seated, a king observing the games, his approving smirk a permanent fixture on his handsome face. His silence was his signature on his wife's cruelty. Under the brilliant, unforgiving light of the chandeliers, Evelyn remained motionless. The champagne clung to the emerald fabric of her dress, darkening the soft green to a deep, bruised jade, like the stain of battle on a silken banner. With a grace that defied the situation, she smoothed the line of her dress, as if the mess were nothing more than a bit of rain. Her gaze finally lifted, steady and unshaken, and it sliced through Isabella's triumphant smirk without a single word. Near the buffet, Miguel, the young server, held his breath. His phone was now live streaming, the view count already ticking into the hundreds. He framed Evelyn's resolute figure, then panned to capture Isabella basking in her own viciousness. "This isn't right," he whispered to the anonymous audience watching through his screen. At her table, the silver-haired woman, Mrs. DeWitt, gripped her husband's arm. "This is shameful," she muttered again, her jaw tight. Her husband nodded, his eyes darting nervously toward the security guards who were now just feet away from Evelyn. Isabella tilted her head, a predator savoring the kill. "You see," she said into the microphone, her tone sharp enough to draw blood, "this is what happens when you try to buy your way into worlds you don't belong in." She turned slightly toward her husband, her smile wide, as if awaiting his applause. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a silent coronation. The polite jazz music faded further into the background, a soundtrack too timid to intrude on such a masterclass in cruelty. Guests clutched their glasses tighter, shifting in their seats, their fascination wrestling with a growing sense of unease. And then, more phones began to rise, not just Miguel's, but dozens scattered across the room, held by younger guests who understood that what they were witnessing was more than a party foul. Tiny glowing lenses were capturing every condescending smirk, every ripple of laughter, every drop of champagne drying on the emerald fabric. And still, Evelyn Vance didn't move. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was a weapon being calibrated. Years of hostile boardrooms, of condescending comments from men who underestimated her, of fighting her way up from nothing. It had all forged this stance. Anchored, deliberate, immovable. She didn't need to shout to be heard. The very atmosphere in the room was beginning to shift, the energy leaning toward her quiet calm, even as the ridicule grew louder. Isabella tapped the microphone again, her patience wearing thin. "Security, escort her out. She's killing the mood." The two guards stepped forward, their shoulders squared, their path now clear. The hall fell into an uneasy hush. The only sounds were the soft clinking of ice in glasses and the scrape of a chair against marble as someone leaned back to watch the final, inevitable conclusion. Isabella lifted her glass in a triumphant toast, her laughter echoing in the sudden quiet. "Some stains just don't belong in a place this clean," she said, her eyes locked on Evelyn. But Evelyn only took one breath, slow and deep, her eyes as steady as ancient stone. The security guards were closing in. The air was thick with expectation, as if the entire gala, all 500 souls, held their collective breath, waiting to see if she would finally break, if she would finally be erased, or if something else entirely was about to begin. The heavy footsteps of the two security guards echoed on the polished marble floor. Each click of their expensive shoes seemed to reverberate through the silent hall, a drumbeat counting down to a final confrontation. Guests leaned sideways in their gilded chairs, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, as if they'd paid a premium for this kind of brutal theater. Isabella Sterling, a crimson siren, swirled the remaining champagne in her glass, her grin a merciless slash across her face. "Take her out," she ordered again, her voice cutting through the microphone. "She doesn't belong here." The guards were inches away now, but Evelyn didn't step back. Her heels remained planted, her spine a rod of steel. She met their professional, impassive gazes with a stillness that was profoundly unsettling. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something heavier. One of the guards, a man with 20 years of experience handling belligerent millionaires, hesitated for a fraction of a second. Something in her eyes gave him pause. Isabella saw the hesitation, and it infuriated her. She snapped her fingers like an impatient queen summoning a servant. "Now!" she barked. A hush began to spread from the front of the room to the back. Phones were lifted higher, a constellation of recording lights. Miguel's live stream was now a torrent of frantic comments scrolling across his screen. "This is disgusting. Who is she? Why is no one stopping this?" His hands trembled, but he kept the camera steady. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he was witnessing something far more significant than high society gossip. Marcus Sterling leaned forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming with a strange light. He hadn't uttered a single word, but his smug satisfaction was a tangible presence in the room. He thrived on these displays of power, on humiliation served in crystal flutes. And then, still soaked, still impossibly calm, Evelyn Vance finally moved. She reached into the small, elegant clutch she held, her movements unhurried and precise. She retrieved her phone, a sleek, featureless black rectangle, and lifted it to her ear. Her voice was low, perfectly modulated, but in the tomb-like silence of the ballroom, it carried to every corner. "Initiate the Black Swan Protocol," she said. The words were cryptic, meaningless to most of the guests. "Target, Sterling Global." The effect was electric. Miguel's eyes widened behind his phone. He zoomed in, capturing every syllable, whispering to his growing audience, "She's not bluffing. I don't know what that means, but she is not bluffing." Isabella Sterling tilted her head back and let out a derisive, theatrical laugh. "Oh, please! Are we making phone calls now? What's next? Are you calling for backup? Your Uber? Does anyone here seriously believe you're anything more than a nobody in a rented dress?" She turned to the crowd, seeking their affirmation, their laughter. A few forced chuckles followed, but they were thinner this time, laced with a new uncertainty. Evelyn didn't bother to answer her. She simply held the phone to her ear, her gaze shifting from Isabella, as if dismissing her entirely, to land directly on Marcus Sterling himself. Her eyes, cool and calculating, carried a message that he alone seemed to recognize. Because for the first time that night, the billionaire's smirk flickered. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible falter, but in the charged atmosphere, it was a seismic event. The guards stopped dead in their tracks. One shifted his weight, suddenly unsure. The other glanced toward Marcus, seeking a new signal, suddenly unwilling to lay a hand on this woman. Isabella caught the shift instantly. "What are you waiting for?" she hissed, her confidence sharpening into raw anger. "Drag her out!" But the moment had already changed. The power dynamic in the room had fractured. The silence was no longer Isabella's weapon. It belonged to Evelyn. Every guest could feel it, the floor tilting, the cruel game losing its momentum. Slowly, Evelyn lowered her phone, slipped it back into her clutch, and seemed to stand even taller. The champagne stains on her emerald gown no longer looked like humiliation. They looked like war paint. And in that charged quiet, she spoke for the first time to her tormentor, her words simple, but carrying the weight of a judge's verdict. "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." The words hung in the air like a guillotine's blade. "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." The forced laughter died in people's throats. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the band, which had been trying to play softly in the background, seemed to stumble, the notes becoming hollow and discordant against the profound silence that followed. Isabella Sterling, encased in her blood-red armor, narrowed her eyes. She mistook composure for a bluff, stillness for fear. She tilted her head, forcing a practiced, condescending smile. "A mistake, sweetheart. The only mistake here was you thinking you could stand among us. Just look at yourself. Soaked, humiliated. You should be thanking me for teaching you exactly where you belong." She raised her glass again, as if preparing to pour another volley of insults, but something in the atmosphere had curdled. Evelyn didn't shrink. She didn't falter. Her voice, when she spoke again, was unnervingly steady, calm, and somehow it seemed to overpower the microphone Isabella was still clutching. "What you did tonight won't fade when the music ends. It will echo, and trust me, you will feel every single reverberation." A ripple of gasps went through the room. Phones were now held aloft without shame, recording openly. Miguel's live stream was a blur, comments exploding across the screen. "Who is she? She's not even scared. This is about more than just a party." The security guards lingered, their hands hovering uselessly a few feet from her arms. They were paid to enforce Isabella's commands, but the sheer, unshakable authority in Evelyn's posture gave them pause. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Marcus Sterling shifted in his chair. It was a subtle movement, a slight uncrossing and recrossing of his legs, but the smirk that had been plastered on his face for the last 15 minutes had vanished completely, replaced by a mask of intense concentration. His wife noticed his unease, and her lips tightened into a furious line as she snapped, "What are you all waiting for? Do your job!" But Evelyn Vance didn't need anyone to act for her. She took a single step forward. The water-darkened silk of her dress clung to her, yet she moved with the grace and purpose of a queen in full regalia. She met Isabella's furious eyes, her own gaze unblinking. "You think champagne can erase a person?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "No. What it erases is the mask." The crowd stirred. A murmur passed from table to table, uneasy, uncertain. These people had seen arrogance before. They lived and breathed it. But they had never seen it turned against itself with such surgical precision. Isabella laughed again, but it was too loud this time, too forced. The sound was brittle, like thin ice cracking. "You're nothing. Do you hear me? Absolutely nothing. This is my husband's world, not yours." Evelyn let the words wash over her, just as she had let the champagne. Then she spoke once more, each syllable precise, deliberate, and final. "Your husband's world?" she repeated softly. "Then watch it collapse." The room seemed to shiver. Every phone captured the moment. At her table, Mrs. DeWitt leaned closer to her husband, whispering, "My God, I think she means it." Her husband nodded grimly, his eyes locked on the poised, solitary figure who was single-handedly holding the room hostage. Marcus Sterling leaned forward now, finally breaking his long silence. His voice was low, but it carried the distinct vibration of a threat. "Who, exactly, do you think you are?" The answer didn't come. Not yet. Evelyn only turned her head slightly, her eyes burning with a calm, terrifying fire. She didn't need to explain herself. The weight of her silence was already a louder introduction than any name. The guards were frozen, caught between two opposing commands, Isabella's frantic barks and the quiet, immovable authority radiating from the drenched woman who was no longer acting like a guest at all. The entire hall held its breath, balanced on the precipice of a revelation. And in that charged moment, every single person in the room knew. The game had just been irrevocably altered, and power was no longer sitting at the head table. The silence was a living thing now, a physical presence pressing against the gilded walls of the ballroom, heavy and unrelenting. Isabella Sterling, radiant in her crimson dress, blinked once, then snapped her fingers at the guards again, a desperate, frantic gesture to reclaim control of a room that was slipping through her fingers. "Why are you just standing there? Remove her!" But the guards were paralyzed, exchanging nervous glances. They understood a truth that Isabella, in her insulated world, could not. Authority didn't always come from volume. They could feel it, a palpable gravity emanating from the woman in the dripping emerald gown, a weight that Isabella's shrieking could not imitate. From his corner of the room, Miguel's live stream ticked past 500, then 1,000 viewers. His camera shook as he whispered to his audience. "She hasn't moved, hasn't said more than a few sentences, and the entire feeling in here has changed." Comments flooded the screen. "She's not scared. This is what real power looks like." "Who is she?" Near the stage, a cluster of younger guests, the heirs and heiresses of the city's fortunes, leaned in, their phones out. They weren't laughing anymore. They were bearing witness. And in the back of the room, the silver-haired Mrs. DeWitt rose slowly, deliberately from her chair. She didn't shout, but her voice, honed by decades of commanding boardrooms and charities, carried with perfect clarity. "Enough! This is a disgrace!" Heads whipped around. Isabella's painted smile cracked, a fissure in a flawless facade. "Sit down," she hissed, her knuckles white as she clutched the microphone. "You don't get to speak here." But Mrs. DeWitt did not sit. She lifted her chin, her expression one of cold contempt. "Neither do you. Not after what you just did." Her words dropped like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of shock and validation across the audience. Finally, Marcus Sterling stood. His chair scraped against the marble, the sound unnaturally loud, echoing through the hall. His face was a mask of calm, almost too calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something new. Unease. He adjusted his diamond cufflinks, a nervous tick disguised as an act of elegance. "My wife is right," he said, his voice deep and resonant, an attempt to smooth over the cracks. "This gala is for winners, and winners know when it's time to walk away." He looked directly at Evelyn, a clear and public dismissal, expecting her to shrink, to finally retreat. She did not. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her expression one of clinical curiosity, as though she were studying a child's particularly interesting tantrum. Isabella clinging to the illusion of control, laughed too loudly. "You hear that? Even my husband says you don't belong." But before Evelyn could respond, another voice pierced the tension. It was Miguel, the server, his live stream still running, his phone held up like a shield. "Everyone online is watching this," he said, his own voice breaking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Thousands of people, and they're all saying the same thing, that she belongs here more than you do." The crowd gasped. 100 phones tilted towards the boy, then swung back to Evelyn. Isabella's face flushed a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her dress. "Shut that down!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Miguel. "Security, take his phone!" But it was too late. The story had escaped the confines of the ballroom. This wasn't just a private humiliation anymore. It was a public spectacle being broadcast to the world. And at last, Evelyn Vance stepped forward. One step, then another. Slow, deliberate, each click of her heels on the marble striking like a judge's gavel. Her eyes swept the room, landing first on Marcus, then on his wife. Her voice was low, but it carved through the air with the precision of a scalpel. "Your empire," she said, "just stepped into the wrong storm." Isabella clutched her champagne glass tighter, her knuckles whitening. She tried to laugh again, but the sound caught in her throat. A dry, cracking noise. Marcus swallowed, his carefully constructed composure slipping as every phone in the room captured his stunned silence. And for the first time all night, the crowd began to shift, their allegiance moving not toward the woman in red, not toward the billionaire, but toward the drenched woman in green, whose stillness was proving to be louder than champagne, louder than money, and far, far louder than fear. Isabella Sterling gripped the microphone as if it were a life raft. Her voice, once so smooth and playful, had sharpened to a jagged blade. "Listen to her," she pleaded with the crowd, gesturing with her champagne glass toward Evelyn. "She doesn't belong here. This gala is for real wealth, for power, not for—" She caught herself, the insult left hanging, a venomous cloud in the air. The crowd shifted uneasily. What had started as entertainment was curdling into something ugly. Mrs. DeWitt crossed her arms, her eyes hard as diamonds. A man in a navy Tom Ford suit whispered to his companion, "She's going too far. This is no longer amusing." Marcus Sterling cleared his throat, a sound more fragile and hollow than he intended. He tried to reclaim control, to steady the room. "My wife's words may be sharp," he began, "but this is our house, our event, and no uninvited guest will be allowed to hijack it." Gasps rippled through the hall. Uninvited? The murmur spread like wildfire, bouncing from table to table. Some guests frowned, pulling out their phones to check the digital guest list. Miguel's livestream ticked past 2,000, then 3,000 viewers. The comment section exploded. "She's an invited guest. He's lying. Expose them. This is about to blow up." Evelyn finally raised her eyes to meet Marcus's. Her voice was perfectly even, not loud, but it silenced the rising chatter in an instant. "Uninvited?" she asked softly. "I suggest you check your records again, Mr. Sterling." A tremor went through the room. Guests exchanged wide-eyed glances. The security guards hesitated mid-step, their mission now hopelessly confused. Even the band's timid music finally bowed out, fading into complete and total silence. Isabella laughed nervously, the sound brittle and thin. "She's bluffing. This is what they do. They pretend, they lie, they sneak into rooms they don't deserve to be in." Her words cracked like whips, but the crowd no longer flinched on command. Phones were up everywhere, a forest of lenses capturing every word, every twitch of her crumbling, painted smile. Then came the voice, that shattered the entire facade. It came from a young woman standing near the event's control booth, her face pale but determined. It was Chloe, a junior event coordinator, barely 23 years old. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "I saw her name on the master list this morning," she announced, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "Her reservation was flagged. Priority 1. She was absolutely supposed to be here." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, shouts of disbelief. Miguel swung his camera toward Chloe, capturing her brave, terrified face. The livestream chat went into a frenzy. "Proof! She's legit! Game over for the Sterlings!" Isabella spun on her heel, her face draining of all color beneath the chandelier's golden glow. "You don't know what you're talking about," she spat at the young coordinator. "You'll be fired by morning. Stay out of this." But Chloe held her ground, lifting her chin. "I won't lie for you. Not for this." The tension in the ballroom snapped like a high-voltage wire. Marcus Sterling clenched his jaw, but it was too late. The narrative had been ripped from his hands. The crowd had turned. They weren't laughing at Evelyn anymore. They were watching him, waiting. Slowly, Evelyn turned, her champagne-soaked dress glistening under the lights. Her silence pressed down on the room, heavier and more damning than any accusation. She didn't need to raise her voice. The room already belonged to her. She looked once more at the billionaire, her gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. "So," she said softly, "tell them again, Marcus. Am I uninvited?" Marcus Sterling's lips parted, but no words came out. Cameras flashed, phones streamed, and in that moment of frozen, guilty silence, the empire he thought was untouchable began to tremble. Marcus's lips moved, a fish gasping for air, but no sound emerged. The silence was merciless, a vacuum that swallowed his authority whole. His wife, Isabella, refusing to surrender, stepped forward and filled the void with pure venom. "Enough of this!" she barked into the microphone, her voice cracking under the strain of 1,000 watching eyes. "She obviously forged her way in. It's all a scam. Security, remove her immediately. And if anyone here is gullible enough to believe this performance, you're being played." The words echoed, but they sounded desperate now, not commanding. A few guests gasped, but many more frowned. The lie was too blatant, too clumsy. It landed with a thud. Phones tilted higher, catching the brittle, panicked edge in her tone. The two security guards shifted uncomfortably. Their hands hovered near Evelyn, but they seemed magnetically repelled, refusing to make contact. Their hesitation was no longer subtle. It was a public declaration of uncertainty, broadcast to every lens in the room. Isabella's eyes flared with rage. "Do it!" she snapped. And then, the unthinkable happened. One of the guards, the older one, slowly, deliberately, shook his head. He took a half step back. The other guard immediately followed suit, lowering his hands completely. A collective murmur swept through the crowd, an electric spark in the air. Power was visibly slipping from Isabella's grasp, and everyone could feel it. Evelyn Vance finally moved again, just one step forward, but it sent a tremor through the room. The champagne still glistened on her emerald dress, which now looked less like a victim's garment and more like the hide of some mythical water-borne dragon. Her voice was calm, controlled, but it cut sharper than any shout. "Touch me," she stated, "and you will never work in this city, in this industry, ever again." The words weren't a threat. They were a statement of fact, laid down like immutable law. The guards froze in place. Guests exchanged frantic glances, whispers rising to a fever pitch. She knows something. She has real power. Who is she? Isabella scoffed, but the sound was hollow, a ghost of her former arrogance. Big words for someone who showed up dripping in cheap fabric. She tried to laugh, but it cracked midway through, thin and forced. Evelyn turned her gaze back to her, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "This cheap fabric doesn't cancel billion-dollar deals," she said. "But I do." The room exploded. Phones jerked upward. Gasps turned into open-mouthed stares. Mrs. DeWitt placed a hand over her heart. Miguel's live stream surged with a tidal wave of comments. "She's in control! This is wild! Watch the empire crumble!" Marcus Sterling finally stepped forward, his voice low, almost pleading now. "Who are you?" The answer didn't come. Not yet. Evelyn's silence stretched, taut and deliberate. Every second of it tightened the invisible noose around the Sterlings. Then Chloe, the junior coordinator, spoke again from the side of the room, her voice trembling but her words strong. "She's not lying. I saw her clearance level in the system. It was executive level override, owner privileges." The gasp this time was collective, a thunderclap rolling through the crowd. Phones captured every syllable. Live streams carried the shocking revelation to tens of thousands of viewers beyond the ballroom walls. Isabella went pale, her lips parting in disbelief. No, that's impossible," she stammered, but her confidence had been utterly shattered. Evelyn finally spoke again, her words soft but carrying the finality of a death sentence. "It's not impossible," she said. "It's inevitable." And with that, the balance of power in the room didn't just shift. It broke. The crowd was leaning toward her now. Not Isabella, not Marcus, but the drenched, silent force who had waited for this exact, perfect moment. The ballroom was no longer a party. It was a courtroom. And Evelyn Vance stood at its center, both witness and judge. Every camera was pointed at her. Every breath in the hall was measured against her silence. Isabella Sterling clutched the microphone, her knuckles bone white, her laugh brittle and sharp. "Executive privileges? Owner clearance?" She spat the words like poison. "You think anyone in this room will believe a soaked stranger over me? Look around. This is my world. These people came to see us, not you." But the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't nod their agreement. They just watched, silent and waiting. Miguel's live stream counter surged past 50,000, then 100,000. The comments rolled like a tidal wave. "She's the owner! Game over! Expose them!" Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside his wife, a fine sheen of sweat prickling at his temples. He reached for her arm, a silent plea for her to stop, but she jerked away, her fury blinding her to the fact that the tide had not just turned, it had become a tsunami. And then, Evelyn Vance lifted her phone again. The movement was small, but it sent a jolt of electricity through the hall. She pressed a single button, then raised the device to her ear, putting it on speaker. Her voice was calm, collected, the absolute antithesis of the chaos surrounding her. "Naya, confirm current status." "Firm." A new voice filled the hall, crisp, professional, and unshaken, emanating from the phone's speaker. "System is primed, Evelyn. The Sterling Global acquisition is marked for termination. One word from you, and the cancellation protocol is final and irreversible." Marcus Sterling's head snapped up, his eyes sharp with sudden, dawning horror. His amusement was gone, replaced by pure, cold dread. His voice, low but urgent, cut through the air. "Cancel what deal?" Evelyn turned her gaze on him. She let the silence stretch, letting him stew in his own panic, every second squeezing the air from his lungs. Finally she spoke, her words precise and devastating. "The deal," she said. "That would have saved your empire from bankruptcy next quarter." Gasps tore through the room. Guests leaned forward, their faces masks of disbelief. Mrs. DeWitt pressed her hand to her chest, whispering, "My God, she has him cornered." Isabella erupted, her voice shrill with denial. Lies, all of it! She's nothing. This is all theater. Don't listen to her. She pointed wildly at the guests, a queen begging for her court's loyalty. But none came. The phones stayed raised. The faces stayed grim. Evelyn didn't even glance at her. Her focus remained locked on the billionaire. You know exactly who I am, Marcus, and you know exactly what I can do. The question is, do you really want me to prove it to everyone? The billionaire's jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle jumped. His silence was the only answer she needed. Chloe, the young coordinator, stepped forward again, her voice louder this time, stronger with conviction. She doesn't need to prove anything. The system already shows her name on the acquisition paperwork. Owner-level access. I saw it with my own eyes. The hall trembled with whispers. Miguel's live stream exploded. This is insane. She's the boss. He's finished. Isabella shook her head violently, her red dress shimmering under the chandeliers like a frantic warning light. No, this is fraud. It's a trick. But Marcus cut her off, his voice sharp with a desperation that bordered on panic. Isabella, stop talking. The command finally silenced her, but it was far, far too late. The damage was done. The room no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the drenched woman in the emerald green dress, who stood still and steady, phone in hand, waiting for the perfect moment to burn everything to the ground. And everyone in the hall knew they were just seconds away from watching an empire collapse in real time. Evelyn Vance did not move. She let the tension in the room tighten like a garrote, let the silence gnaw at Marcus Sterling's nerves until he visibly shifted on his feet, a man cornered by his own creation. The ballroom was a furnace, and every eye was fixed on her. Finally, she raised her phone once more, pressing it lightly to her ear, taking it off speaker. Nia, she said, her tone as calm as stone. Hold the command. I want him to hear it from me first. Marcus's throat worked as he swallowed. Who are you? He demanded, his voice lower now, stripped of all its former arrogance, leaving only raw, desperate curiosity. Tell me your name. Evelyn lifted her chin. The champagne still glistened on her dress, dripping slowly onto the marble floor, but her voice was as solid as the bedrock beneath the city. You know my name, Marcus. You've seen it on every single document your lawyers have pushed across the table for the last 6 months. Murmurs rippled through the stunned crowd. Marcus's face went from pale to ashen. His lips parted, but no words came. His wife clutched his arm, her eyes wild with confusion. She's bluffing. She has to be bluffing. But then Evelyn stepped closer, each heel strike on the marble echoing like a gavel. Her words were clear, final, and utterly impossible to misinterpret. I am the head of the Vance Consortium. I am the one acquiring your empire. And tonight, you and your wife poured champagne on the woman who owns your future. The collective gasp that followed shook the very foundations of the room. Guests leaned forward, jaws slack, while a storm of camera flashes captured the exact moment the truth shattered the gala's glittering illusion. Isabella tried to laugh, but it came out as a jagged, broken sound. You? You're nothing but... She never finished the sentence. Because at that precise instant, the massive LED screen behind the stage flickered to life. The gala's elegant slideshow froze, then shifted, replaced by the breaking news banners of a major financial network. The headlines rolled across in bold, blood-red letters. Sterling Global Acquisition Deal in Jeopardy. Sources confirm negotiations have suddenly faltered. Investors panic as Billionaire's holdings plummet in after-hours trading. The room gasped as one. Marcus spun toward the screen, his face a mask of horror. His wife's champagne glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that was deafening in the sudden silence. Evelyn didn't even flinch. She spoke into her phone, her voice steady and clear. "Proceed, Nia." Nia's reply was crisp, decisive, and utterly final. "Cancellation protocol confirmed. The deal is void." Marcus Sterling staggered back, his mask of composure finally crumbling into dust. "No," he breathed. "No, you can't. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "I know exactly what I've done. I gave you an opportunity, a lifeline, and your wife turned it into a public spectacle. So I turned it into a verdict." The hall erupted. Not with laughter this time, but with a cacophony of voices, of awe, of disbelief, of shock. Some guests began to clap, others shouted, and everyone filmed with trembling hands. Miguel's livestream comment feed became an unreadable blur. "She owns him! This is justice! This is empire falling in real time!" Isabella clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide with panic. "Say something, stop her!" But he couldn't. His silence was louder than her screams. The empire had cracked, and every guest in the room had just witnessed the first fatal fracture. Evelyn Vance stood tall in her soaked dress, her posture unshaken. And for the first time all night, she allowed herself the faintest ghost of a smile. It was not a smile of triumph, but of cold, calculated inevitability. And the crowd knew, with a chilling certainty, that the downfall had only just begun.